Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode of the Stubble Talk podcast. My name is Ben, and today I am joined by an incredible Michael Smith.
Hello.
Mike, what do you...
Either. I've grown into Michael as I've got older, but I'm still Mike mainly.
It was one of those things that I'm sure as a kid you absolutely hated.
Absolutely.
And now you're like, hey, I
can embrace it. Absolutely.
Mike, could you do me a favour and introduce yourself? Tell me who you are, what you do, and something fun about yourself.
Okay, I am Mike. I'm currently team leader at Hare. Having just Curo, having just moved over from antisocial behaviour for 6 years. Before Curo, I was a chef. Fun fact: I have won an episode of Tipping Point.
I tell you what, I forget that every time. I actually did know that, and I forget every time it gets brought up. I'm like, oh.
It is my one claim to fame.
What was the final question?
The final question was, it was about skyscrapers in London, and one of the nicknames, and it's the one that turned out to be the cheese grater, which was a pure guess, but a correct guess.
But you got it, and
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
There you go. So if you want insider knowledge on skyscrapers, Mike's actually your man.
By pure fluke.
Hey, sometimes we all just need a little bit of luck.
Exactly.
Mike, my first question every time I do any one of these podcasts is to actually just ask, how are you? How is life? How is just things?
Yeah, I'm good. Like, new challenges, facing, like, really enjoying it, feeling a really good place at the moment. Just things going really well. So I'm happy.
Work things good, home things good?
Work things good, home things are okay, personal life going really well, like, just things going in the right direction, which
Amazing,
is what we like to see.
That is, really nice to hear.
Yeah.
Because life always has its ups and downs.
It certainly does.
And it sounds like you're in quite a good...
Yeah, it's been a good, I think when I compare where I am now to where I was last year, like, it's a much better place, which is nice. So.
Good. Mike, I was, when I first started this podcast, I was really amazed because you actually approached me and said, hey, I would love to come and do this. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yep.
That's, I don't know. I probably have a little bit of imposter syndrome with this and think, hey, why would anyone want to come on and do it? So it was really cool. So thank you so much for actually asking.
You're welcome. No.
Why is it that you wanted to come and do this?
I think there's a couple of reasons. I think part of it is mental health, especially male mental health, has really been really important to me. It has for a very long time. I think at the time I asked you was a time when I was working in antisocial behaviour, and a part of that role is safeguarding and mental health. So it was very prominent in my day-to-day in my work life. I'm a mental health first aider, so I've been able to delve into it a bit more and get some specialist training on it, and it's also just been something that's been quite prominent throughout my life. I think the other thing is the background, which is what I think we're going to talk a lot about today. And with our backgrounds is, having worked in hospitality before, it was so prominent, but I wasn't aware how prominent it was till you leave, and then going through the training and doing a bit of research and looking back at it, realize just how important discussion is, which is why I was so keen to be doing this when I discovered that you were doing this. So.
No, that's sick. Thank you so much for those are all really cool things that I think we can have a really
absolutely
interesting conversation about, hopefully. I mean, people still listen to this, so it means some people find it interesting, I suppose. I would love to start then. You said that you are a mental health first aider. What does that mean, and what does that look like on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, I suppose?
So it's a scheme that it's national, but we've brought in at Curo. So we brought it in around, it would be about 5 years ago now. So we have physical first aiders, and I think that we started to look at it as an organisation where mental well-being was as important. it's much more around signposting, referral, and conversation than anything. Not mental health trained by any means, but it's enabled me to feel even more confident in having conversations around mental health and signposting, but also giving a designated signpost for independent and confidential support for the organisation. We promote it in all our inductions now. There's posters everywhere, and it's just signposting. But if you're not confident or don't feel willing to be able to talk to your manager or friend, and you want to talk to either someone who you may know or someone who you've never spoken to in the business and get that little bit of advice or guidance, that's what we're there for. So I think we're lucky in a way that it's certainly not a conversation that I'm having on a weekly basis or even a monthly basis sometimes. But when it's needed, it's had really positive results, and that in majority of it is just listening.
Yeah.
And like I said, in other places, it's referrals to specialist organisations. So that could be around grievance and loss and bereavement, or specialist medicals treatments, or just general mental health advice. All of the interactions I've had through it have been really, really positive. And I'd like to think that, I think in one way it's really good that we're not having these conversations weekly and we haven't got hundreds of people coming out, but I just hope that there's not someone who's worried to reach out and hasn't yet, because it is fully confidential. The details don't get past your manager, they don't get passed to anyone else in the organisation, and we don't share names even amongst other mental health first aiders.
Cool.
We share general information around, I've had a conversation that relates
With
to
someone,
this, and this is what advice I've given, or I've got someone who's approached me with this, how do you think would be best? And it starts that conversation, but it is fully confidential. So
Wow. And do you feel like, obviously you did training, it's a 1 or 2 day course, am I right?
So it's a 2-day course, and it's you do a refresher every 2 or 3 years. So I've done my 2-day course, and then I've done my 1-day refresher, and then I think I'm due for a refresher next year as well.
Cool. And what do you feel like you learned from actually doing that course? And do you feel like you kind of learned something about yourself in doing that course?
Absolutely. I think it helped me approach conversations very differently. Listening more than talking. I think it's very easy to have conversations, especially, and try to relate to someone and go, oh yeah, no, I know that because I've gone through this, or this has happened in my life, when actually a lot more of it is just absorbing and then giving advice and guidance when needed. And I think sometimes in some of the conversation I had is just for talking, you see the release go, and that's helped. And then there's other times where they are asking more direct questions around, is there anyone I can talk to? Is there anything I can do? How will I approach this from a work point of view? Make referrals to like EPA counselling and that type of thing. But it's just, it really gave me a confidence to feel that I was the right person for these people to talk to. And then you've also then got the actual knowledge information around all of these referral points, some which I never knew before or wouldn't even consider. We've got referral points for Polish national speakers directly. So if you've got someone who feels more comfortable talking in their native language, they can do so, or referral points for around people with anorexia, so directly through Sven. And it's just all of these agencies are out there in a time where services are being cut and everywhere. It's good to see that there are still specialist referral points for people.
Wow, yeah, I had no idea that half of those things were things. And that's, really interesting just to kind of hear from my own side, because I had no idea. And it's cool that you also didn't have an idea. And sometimes you do have to kind of go through that training, but then you have then that ability to signpost and to go, hey, actually, there is this for you, and you probably don't even know about it. And because it is specialist, it's not necessarily something you would kind of shout about, I suppose, and go, hey, there is this.
Absolutely.
Something else which you brought up at the start of things you wanted to talk about was that you used to, I mean, you're on secondment, right? So
I am.
So technically still are, but
Yep.
technically not. You work in the tenancy compliance team, and you kind of said how you've seen, I suppose, a lot and dealt with a lot relating to mental health.
Yes.
In that role. What has been the biggest challenge? Because I suppose it's a very complicated position to be in. Maybe would it be a good point to actually say, what does working in tenancy compliance actually involve, and what was your job role?
The easiest way I can explain working in tenancy compliance is 80% of the contact you're either going to be shouted at or you're going to be cried at. Wow. It is some of the most difficult conversations that I think we have as an organisation. You're dealing with victims of antisocial behaviour who could be going through the most traumatic thing that's happened in their lifetime, perpetrators of antisocial behaviour who may be acting out through different reasons, whether that's through mental health, through past trauma, or cries for help, or just general behaviour. We deal with safeguarding, so we look at child and adult safeguarding, domestic abuse, and then certain mental health issues such as hoarding. So it's a real mixed bag of what the team deals with. It's one of those things where we used to joke upstairs where it's like, oh, if you don't know who to send it to, then send it to tenancy compliance, because they'll find out what to do. So it's a real 50-50 split in between antisocial behaviour and safeguarding. So the team is the lead for safeguarding. So if anyone in their business has a concern for someone's welfare, well-being, or general safety, it would then refer up to us. We'd then do an initial risk assessment, and then make referrals where needed, make contact, and look to deal with that. I think the most difficult ones, and sadly the most common ones we see, were people in mental health crisis, where there was either an attempt or a threat to harm or end their life. So that's the main part. I think the key part of your question, what's the most difficult part of that, it's that real fine line between empathy and detachment.
Yeah.
The first call I ever took with it, where someone was making a threat to their life, it that resonates with you. Like, you're never prepared for your first time. As much as you've gone through the training and the prepared for, like, you will deal with these calls. This is what you do. This is when you call the police. This is when you don't call the police. This is for referrals you can make. It still doesn't prepare you for one person on the end of the phone that they're talking to. And then as that goes on, so I was in that team for 6 years. You do have to detach from it, because otherwise you end up taking it all home. And if you take it all home, then it starts to burden on you. Yeah. But it's about having that detachment, but keeping that empathy there. And thankfully, that's something that everyone in the team still has, and there's no one who doesn't. And the right work is being done, but it's just a case of that being able to offload it and look at it from a professional point of view.
That must have been really hard.
It is really hard. It is. And it's not a job for everyone, that's for sure. But it can be an incredibly rewarding job as well.
Did you find that the severity and what you were kind of dealing with, like, had any impact on your own mental health? Or did you find it fairly easy to manage? Because it must have been quite easy just to have those thoughts or recollections of conversations, or wondering about how someone might be doing after a potentially serious call. Like, how do you not take that home? How do you not let that affect?
It's hard, and I think there's certain ones which stay with you more than others. It has been I've been quite lucky where I haven't had anything carry with me too much, and we're quite lucky, and we've got really good communication with a lot of agencies where we're able to get the updates, so we're not there chasing answers or looking at what ifs, and the results that we get are mainly very positive and lead to a better place. There comes a handover point as well where we do hand over to specialist mental health services or adult social services, and they pick up and they then carry on. But it's hard. It is hard. Like, and I don't have a flat out answer into this is how I detach. This is how I don't. But it's there. I think it does become it's kind of helpful where it's such a fast-paced team that you can't linger on it for too long because you've then got another call coming through or you're then dealing with something else. So you kind of just roll with it.
Yeah, and then by the end of the day, you've kind of forgotten in a good way. And I think that was something I noticed when I was working on phones. It's you kind of go through things so quickly that you almost that really challenging call or when someone shouted at you, you've kind of forgotten about it. Yeah. Half an hour later, and then it's just easy to kind of detach in that way, right? So you mentioned as well that like 80% of your phone calls or engaging with someone was you were being shouted at or cried at. Yeah. Is it easy to just, when you've got someone shouting at you, to, like, we all have that thing in us, right? To, when someone's shouting at us, to, I think, naturally put our, is it fur up? Is that the phrase? Yep. And to kind of engage back, like, especially when you're dealing with that volume of, and I've seen some of it, like, how do you detach when someone is shouting at you? And is there kind of anything that you could advise of when people are having to deal with those tough conversations that we all have in life, or when someone gets in your face for no reason? Yep. How do you deal with that personally?
Yeah, I mean, I find the shouting conversations easier than the crying conversations.
How so?
I think I detach more from the shouting because majority of the time they're not shouting because it's me on the phone. They're shouting about the situation, or they're shouting because I'm the person who's delivered them news as opposed to a personal message. It is a lot easier now than it was when I first joined the job. I think when I came from chef life to here, where, and I'm sure we'll get onto it, but where chef life is incredibly hostile, and you go from being the shouter to being shouted at, my initial reaction is still to bite back and you learn to, one, because you're in a professional setting, and if you start shouting back, you'll kind of get pulled up on it. But I just think you then learn to separate the situation, understand the frustration, but also I have a lot of confidence in the organisation and the team that if anything does cross over too far, it will get picked up in the correct measure. I talk to this when I'm training like new starters who come through, and I try to teach them the difference between someone's frustration, someone's aggression. People are allowed to be annoyed. People are allowed to wear their grievances, and some people do it in different ways. We all have different communication methods. I think especially when you take it to a real deep level, when you look at upbringing or past trauma or coping, like, people do it differently. I think we see it within our colleagues, like, we all have different ways. And I think that's how it becomes easier, where you can sit and you can take it. And it is that age-old thing of, it is harder to shout at someone who's not shouting back, and that can diffuse the situation. That's not the way every time, and there come times where you just have to, like, hang up the phone and let it go, but it's much easier now where I don't feel that it's a personal attack. Whereas the first time someone shouted at me, so yeah, it's funny, but yeah, it's the shouting doesn't bother me, and if anything, it just makes it a little bit brings it up a little bit.
I get you. You gave me a really nice transition there as well. Of you said that you used to be the shouty. I have worked in kitchens.
Yes.
And I have worked with chefs. And I definitely understand the fast-paced,
Yep.
high-pressure
Yep.
situations. I've definitely had a frying pan thrown at me across a kitchen before. Let's dive a little bit more into that.
Yep.
So you used to be a chef.
Yep.
Were you officially, like, I presume you went to a kind of
no? So I got
how did you get involved?
I got into chef in a really strange way. So I started by working front of house, and it was one Christmas where a couple of chefs had left, and I'd gone up to, I was chucked on the pot wash. Chucked on the pot wash, washing. One of the comedy chefs then had a little bit of a sulk and decided to walk out. So then it was just like, you're the only person we have here. Can I chuck you on cold side? And I was just like, sure. Why not? Really enjoyed it, and then transferred over to the kitchen, and then learned more and more and worked up while I was in the kitchen there. So no formal training, nothing officially, just a real enjoyment of food, enjoyment of the fast pace, and an enjoyment of being back of house and just being able to like have that let go. And I think it's really appealing when you go in. Like, I think when you're on the inside, it is quite appealing because you've got this like brigade, and you're there, and it doesn't matter. You can swear, and you can shout, and you can go out and smoke, and you can do it. Which with powers you don't have in front of house, and it becomes this little appealing thing.
Yeah.
But I think looking back on it now, and remember looking in from the outside, and I don't think this is a personal attack on anyone who's a chef, because I myself have been one. But I think the role, when a chef is in his chef role, I think they can be the most like horrendous people, and it can be the most toxic environment.
Yes.
And I think that's why it plays out the way it is, and what we get onto about the impact on chefs and hospitality. Because you say that you've had a frying pan thrown at you. I had a ladle, which I used to bang on my pass, and I think I look back and there's a lot of things that I'm ashamed of in the way that I reacted to. So because you're in this fast pressure environment, and it almost becomes acceptable to talk to people like rubbish, and it's not. And I think it becomes that thing where someone comes up, someone brings something back because the customer has said this. And I think this is the thing where I go back, and now I look back on it and I go, oh, that person who shouts at me on the phone, even though I haven't done anything, why am I getting the brunt? Why is the waiter or waitress getting the brunt? Because they've sent this back. And there was one thing that I remember so vaguely, and it's something that I've since spoken to the person about since I've left. But it was one service. I had my head chef out, I had my sous chef out, so I was running.
Jeez.
Which, for a very novice chef within his first 18 months, on a Saturday night, is a really, really intense thing. It was chicken supreme. So you've got this bone-in chicken thigh with new potatoes and peppers.
I think you can remember the exact dish.
Absolutely.
It was as well.
New potatoes, peppers, and cabbage, and then a garlic aioli. Really, really nice to skin on. I felt I'd cooked this perfectly with this perfect crispy skin. Send it down. So we had this like dolly pass that would go down. The next thing I know, I've got someone stood at my pass, quivering.
Yeah.
And we had this line, this physical line, which was, if you're not a chef, you don't cross this line. Mainly for health and safety, to be fair, because you've got fires and you've got flames and but she crossed over. And it was like, killing my party, that. And she's then saying, she's like, oh, this is overdone. I was like, it's not overdone. It's how it should be cooked. And she's like, oh, the customer's saying it's overdone. Which is this whole thing of, okay, well, that's what the customer's saying, that's what we should be doing. But of course, not how I acted. You swore, I swore and shouted, and I banged my ladle down, and then, and it was just the most awful situation. And I think if someone spoke to me in that regard, well, my front be off and I'd be gone. No, I'd be like, I'm sorry, I'm not paid to do that. And I just think it's that environment to instill in you where if you didn't, and I think this comes down to different head chefs, and I will add that I've worked with very good head chefs and I've worked with very awful head chefs, and it was this case of, oh, if you didn't fight back at the bar staff, they'd walk over you, and if you didn't do this thing, they'd get away with it, and it's like you kind of had to prove it, and it was this
quite like an old school,
very
way of,
very
like,
old
doing
school,
stuff.
very very misogynistic in a lot of ways, and just not acceptable. And I think it's only after I say it's only after leaving. It was about 4 months before I left that I opened my eyes to it. And that's why I started to look to leave the industry, because this new head chef had come in, didn't like the guy, didn't like his style. His cooking, incredible. Like, very, very talented chef, but just not someone I wanted to work with. And it just really opened my eyes just to it. And it was then that I then had the conversation with the waitress it was, and I was just like, I was horrendous to you, man. Like, it was completely unacceptable, and it doesn't make it right, but I'm sorry, like I shouldn't have. And I think there's definitely more than one example where it's gone through, but it's just such a toxic environment, which is so sad because food is such a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Like, I love food. I love cooking. I love the art. Like, I think it's an art and I think it's a science, but it's just such a horrible environment if you're in a really, really horrible kitchen. And I think the more we see go on where mental health has become a thing and the impact on the industry has become a thing, that you are now getting kitchens where there's the right balance and the right environment and it's being called out. But as much as like 7-8 years ago, which was when I was in the kitchens, like, that wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And do you think that that approach and that way of, you know, shouting and kind of degrading people has probably been glamorized by people like Gordon Ramsay and chefs of that kind of ilk to just say whatever you want and there are no repercussions? And that's now just created this. I don't think it's just now that it's been created. I think it's been around for as long as I was working in the kitchen at 13 years old.
Yep.
I think it's always been around, but I think it's definitely been glamorized now to just say whatever you want and do whatever you want in the kitchen, right?
that's it. I definitely think that's a large part of it. I think it's the perception of what a chef should look like. And I also think it's, if you go back 10 years, you've then got head chefs who would have trained under chefs who came up in the 70s and the 80s, which is when it was very male dominated, very aggressive, very hostile, and just no respect. And it was a case of you'd earn respect, and if you hadn't earned your stripes, you didn't have respect. And that was the same whether you were front of house and not a chef, so you weren't included, and you were trespassing if you came in the kitchen, to pot washers and commie chefs and junior sous and just everyone coming up, and there's always this like one-upmanship, and it's just, you were made to feel like an imposter if you weren't presenting in that way. Because I had this lovely sous chef who was the nicest, soft-spoken guy, and it would just cause so much friction between the head chef because he'd present in such a different way where he'd be this kind of thing.
He'd be the bad guy, he'd be the good guy, right?
Absolutely. And it's so funny to see when actually it's like everyone reacted so much better to the nice guy in the sous, and like the food worked better and the environment was better and like the well-being was there, and then you'd come in on the head whose kitchen it was, and it just changed. It's just so backwards when you look at it, but it was so normal at the time.
But it's when you're in that environment, you don't quite know how that environment is almost perceived from the outside, right? And something where you spoke about kind of the environment and it being quite toxic. Something which I personally really notice is when you're in that hospitality sector, it's so close knit, and people literally just end up living with each other, having affairs with each other, doing whatever. But I think a really big thing is that all of those people then go out together, and alcohol is such a massive part of hospitality, right?
I think the shifts that you work, and so you're working every weekend, you're working every holiday, you're working evenings, So when it comes out to finishing your shift and going out for an after work drink or finishing work, there's nowhere open to go and have a coffee. Like it's a case if you go there. So the only people who are out at that time are hospitality. So you thrive off each other. It was abnormal to not have a drink when you finish a shift, which is so unhealthy when you think about when you look back at it, but it's so normal at the time. And it was never, you'd never go for 1 pint after. You'd go for, you'd always do a couple, and then you'd go in the next day, and then you'd do the same again and the same again, and it becomes,
It's just a cycle, right?
it's a cycle, and it's a dependency. I'm not a massive drinker myself. Like I don't drink a lot now, and I was quite lucky to not get into that cycle when I was in there. And it's the same with drugs, to be fair. Like it's a massive, massive culture where, like there's an old saying where like kitchens are run on cocaine, and it's just so normal again that it's scary, and it becomes a thing. And my kitchen wasn't that bad for it. Like I will be honest, like my kitchen was not one of those, so it was better. But I think when you look at the statistics of addiction within chefs and hospitality worker, it's so high. Yeah. Like it's crazy, and I think that's because it becomes a coping mechanism and the norm and social. And then if you don't do it or you don't go out for a drink, you then become the outcast, which in that toxic environment makes it even harder for you to then feel part of it. And I think that's the good thing that is changing, because I still have friends who are chefs, and I think that culture is still there, and that culture will always be there within there, especially with the drinking, because especially if you're working pubs as opposed to restaurants, that's such like that's betrayed. But the awareness of it and the understanding and having that work-life balance is getting better from friends I still have in the industry. Like I think it's still got a long way to go in that regard, but overall I feel like the industry is improving.
That's nice that you actually still have connections there, and you actually feel like there is change, which is actually so good to hear.
Yeah.
Because I only left hospitality a year ago.
Yeah.
And I don't know, for me I feel like I didn't really see a lot of change over kind of 17, 18 years. But then I suppose when I also started at 13, I wasn't probably privy to.
I think the thing that's nice is for friends who I have are working in restaurants that are being opened by 20-year-olds and 25-year-olds, people who are new to the industry and being able to do it in their own way and have come from this. Like well-being was never a word, and work-life balance was never a thing, and it was a case of if you're doing any less than 60 hours, you're weak. Like, and I think that's not the case anymore. You're seeing changes in hours and availability. You're seeing like the way the pop-ups are working, and it's just. I think those ones are where I'm seeing the improvement, and those are the ones my friends work at. I think if you still go to your like traditional like chain or bread and butter or pubs, like that's where you're still going to have an issue, and there's a long way to go. So
I think something you just kind of said about the hours you work as well. I was something which I was so shocked about when I started this job was that I was allowed to be ill.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I have had more time off in my current job, which is 5 days, over the space of 9 months than I've ever had off in 10, 11 years of working in hospitality. It's mad.
You're not made to feel ashamed of it.
No, but when you're working in hospitality, there is a culture of you can't be ill, you can't be sick, you can't let down.
You can't let down your team. Because absolutely. Because you're never resourced at a pub. You're never fully resourced at a pub or a restaurant. And if you don't, then you're made to feel bad because you're going to have colleagues who, like we say, are your friends because they're the people you go out with, and you're made to feel that you're impacting on them. But you're just constantly degrading yourself and impacting yourself by not allowing yourself time to recover, and you just like burn out. Like burning out, like I felt constantly exhausted. Like, it was just unacceptable. Like, that's the only way to look at it. It was unacceptable. Like, and yeah, it's so bad. And I think, like you say, like when you came here is when you realise, oh, I'm allowed to be sick, or like I can actually book annual leave just like semi easily. Like, and I don't have to work Christmas Day. Like,
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Like having Christmas off last year was like, well, it's the first time ever I've had a week off over Christmas. I had Christmas and New Year's off, and I was like, "What?
Yeah.
This is how the normal people live." But I think there's something in all of that as well. With we've said so much about like the shifts and the effect, the hours, and everything else. You don't sleep,
No,
right? And I think that's one of those things which goes so under the radar. And I was listening to a podcast in January. It's a Diary of a CEO, and he had on the executive medical expert of Whoop. Obviously, she knows her stuff, and she was saying that, like, if you're a shift worker, the average life expectancy is 15 years less because of sleep, because the lack of sleep, that the impact that has on your body, whether that's stress or illness. I was blown away by like the amount of research that has been done on the lack of sleep. And in hospitality, you are not paid well.
No.
Yet the long-term effects of physical health and mental health are not reflected in that pay at all. And I was just so blown away. Like, when you actually think about it, like, and I know you said you still have friends in hospitality at the moment. Like, do you have conversations with them and go, "Hey, I think you should get out"? Or
absolutely, yeah, I certainly do. I was out the other weekend and met one of my friends who has been in the industry for such a long time, and they were just saying, they're like, I need to get out and done. It's like, I'm sick of the weekends. Like, I'm not having a life. Like, it's impacting, and he's just like so burnt out with it. And I say, like, I think you need to get out of the industry. I think it's fun and it's enjoyable, but I think there's such a lifespan on it.
Yeah.
Such a lifespan on it. Until you get to the stage where, I mean, it's hard, isn't it? Because you've got a passion for it. If you can get in the right environment, yeah, but it's not worth it. It's like, and I think that's why I look back, and people say to me all the time, it's like, oh, would you ever go back to being a chef? And it's like, if I could do 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, absolutely. But you're not going to get that, and not for good enough money with the right resources and the right balance and well-being. It just doesn't exist in the industry.
It's impossible. 100%. And I suppose in kind of all of that, how was your mental health when you were working? And you sounds like you had probably some degree of burnout at some multiple points, and the shifts and the culture and the toxicity.
Yep.
How did you get through it and make it out?
I was burnt out. I was constantly angry, and that was the thing. That was the real thing for me, was I wasn't happy, constantly being angry, knowing I was going into work, going to have a fight, going to be annoyed. And that was just, it wasn't me. It was then starting to impact my personal life, impact my relationships, and it just wasn't enjoyable, and it killed the passion a little bit. And when you then lose the passion for the food is when it's all gone, and it's just not a job you can do if you're not enjoying it. So that's when I started to look at trying to find something else, and it was a case of I'll do anything, like anything that's going to give me a bit of routine and rhythm, and hopefully a little bit more money, which, let's face it, isn't hard to beat when you're in hospitality because it's not like you're being paid great. So then I found here, which was going to be a 18-month stopover while I find what I really want to do, and I hit 7 years in September. So
wow,
yeah.
So would you say you've kind of found what?
Oh yeah,
you
absolutely,
want to do?
Absolutely. Like I think it's working in housing isn't something I ever thought I'd do, but it's something that I've learned to really enjoy. Like my knowledge has come up, and there's a lot of progression going forward. So yeah, so I'm definitely a lot more content now and happy with it. So
do you feel like that was partly through finding like fulfillment in your day to day, or do you feel like it was the switch in environment? What do you feel like it is that's actually like really made that difference to you?
I think the emphasis on well-being and the ability to have that work-life balance has been massive in there. Being able to hone your skill and learn your knowledge helps as well. And I think when you enjoy something and you're confident at what you do, that helps you go through. And that's something that I've been very lucky that I've been able to do. Like I've been able to very quickly expand my knowledge, grow, share it, and use it. And that's been the big thing as to why I think I've been here so long. So, and don't plan on going anywhere anytime soon. So, which is good. Yeah.
Something I wanted to bring up, which actually you brought up to me, was the Burnt Chef project.
Yes.
So I went out and looked at kind of their website. It's their group that I was I don't know if that's the right word, but organization.
Yeah.
That I was kind of familiar with. But spent some time like researching their website and looking at some of the stats which they've put out, and I was blown away by some of the research that they've done. So it says, so the Burnt Chef project said that 84% of people that they have spoken to have experienced mental health issues. It's 84%, and 46% would not feel comfortable talking about their concerns with colleagues. Like those numbers, like that's basically 9 out of 10 people have experienced mental health issues to some degree in hospitality, and basically half would not feel comfortable talking about their own mental health concerns.
The sad thing is, I think that second number, I'm surprised that that's as high as it is.
Wow, really?
Because I don't feel that, and maybe this is something that has changed. But certainly at the time I was in the kitchen, we were never having conversations about how we were feeling or showing a sign of weakness. So I think there's still a long way to go, and I don't think it's acceptable. But that number of saying that, this is quick maths, 54% are confident to have those conversations, that's higher than my experiences. The first number basic, that does shock me, but that is
I was surprised it was that high.
Yeah.
Because I think with all the other stats which have been published over the last couple of years about people experiencing mental health, I think it's like 1 in 3 or 2 in 3. I can't remember, but even then that's only 66%. Yeah. So that's still such a proportionate jump up. And I think it just shows the impact that working crazy hours, the effects of no sleep, drinking, drugs, everything else that comes with that, the impact that then cause.
I think it's one of the clearest ties between how physical health can impact your mental health, absolutely. And it's just, there's so many. I think if you were to pick one of the things to go through, you're going to see that would have a decline on anyone's mental health, whether that's the alcohol consumption or the lack of sleep or the aggression and hostility. But when you put all of them in there, it is no wonder that everyone's been impacted by it. The Burnt Chef project, it's an organisation that I discovered after I'd left the industry. So it wasn't anything that I was aware of when I was in there. I want to say it was founded around 2018, which was after I'd left anyway. But I discovered it. So a couple of weeks after I'd joined Curo and was I'd basically agreed to carry on working weekends for around 2 months after I left, just because it was a case of, one, it was that whole, when you go from being paid weekly to being paid monthly, to lose it all and then have to last 6 weeks till your first pay. It was like, I'm going to carry on working weekends just so I've got a little bit of money coming in, but also just for, you're made to feel bad because you're leaving the industry, when I should have been like, you know what, this is for me, like, see
the guilt tripping culture that is in,
so I'd handed my notice in. I'd stopped working full time. I was only working the weekends, and I'd started here. And about 3 weeks after I started here, I got a call from my GM, and our assistant manager had taken his own life. He was really really new to our pub, but had worked the industry for many years. He took his own life, and that was a massive like kick and wake up call, like in cementing that I'd made the right decision. I can't speculate as to why, and I can't say, it's because of the industry what he did that, and that's not what I'm saying at all. But I just think that there and there, seeing that physical toll and knowing some of the details as to what was going on just can't have helped. And I think it was a big wake up call for a lot of people who were working in the pub that I was in. So.
Wow.
And I think that stuck with a lot of people, and it made a lot of people question. Not necessarily, I don't think it made people question not necessarily the industry or point any fingers with that, but actually I think it gave people opened a lot of eyes into what's important in life, and maybe doing 60 hours in a pub and going to the 60 hours at work and then going to the pub for a drink after isn't what's important. And that was certainly a big thing for me, which made me then fully detach, and that's when I was like, you know what, I'm even done with weekends there. And like I've gone back, I went back a couple of Christmases and helped over the Christmas market, sure, but that was my time.
When you do a one-off, it's different.
It's different, and be like, this can't be the norm, even for me on weekends, because I'm only going to burn myself up more because I'm doing 5 days in the office and I'm doing 2 days there and there's no day off, and it's just I made this move for the right reason. I need to like cement it down, and that was it. And I had a conversation with my GM, because I joined here in the September, worked in the pub till October, and then went back over that Christmas and I had a conversation with her in the Christmas party, which in hospitality, takes place in the middle of January.
Yeah. At least,
and had the conversation with the GM, and I think that was also a massive wake up for her into like what's important, and just such a sad thing for such a young man to make.
How old was he?
He would have been late 20s, I'd say, early 30s. Like, I didn't know him incredibly well, and I'm not gonna sit here and say that I did, because I'd only worked with him for a couple of weeks because he transferred over. But it's just such a sad thing, and it had the wake up call for me, and certainly a couple of people I spoke to, the wake up call for them. So,
and do you feel like that was kind of the impact, like that wake up call? Or do you think there was longer lasting?
I definitely believe there's long lasting. There's definitely longer lasting. There's definitely, for some people, especially those who knew him a lot more, I think there's still a lot of trauma and a lot we go through. And I don't think you ever truly lose it or ever truly accept it. And I think it's only, you just need to try and find some form of positive from it. And thankfully, I think some of that was people making the decision to prioritize a bit more in what's important to life. So, which isn't 65 hours at a pub.
Yeah, jeez.
So.
Wow. And obviously you discovered the Burnt Chef project afterwards.
Yes. So that it was when I was put forward to become a mental health first aider. And I was looking at all these things. But one thing that I didn't see in our referral pack was specialist referrals around hospitality. But a conversation was had with the trainer, and a couple of other people who I worked with had also come from the industry before, and we were talking about the impacts on it. So there's certain stats around which occupations have highest mental health and highest suicide rates, and farmers and rural workers are one of the highest suicide rates going forward, and a lot of that is around access to firearms, access to machinery, that type of thing. And I was very shocked to not see hospitality in there. And that's when I started to do some research myself, discovered the Burnt Chef project and started to see the work that they do. We each took on, last year, trying to do like a specialist month to bring promotion. And I done that, so I got in touch with them, got some information from them, and just started to share awareness. As much as we're not in hospitality in this industry and we're very far from it, I think everyone knows someone who works in a pub, in a restaurant, in a bar. And I just think it's just about that awareness and that outreach that they do, because they can help with referrals, they can help with conversations. And I just think, if anything, just open the eyes into having these conversations. I think they do a lot of work with chains and businesses to try and promote that conversation. And I think the conversation is the big thing. And actually, if you can start that conversation and you can start to call out toxicity, the bad chefs will leave, or the bad chefs will be made to feel that it's not acceptable. And I think that's what needs to change. I think the industry can change for the better. I think it's a long way to go, and I think it's going to be a big old fight. But I think the more that these conversations are had, the more organisations that are like Burnt Chef will help change it to the stage where we won't be having these conversations about how bad hospitality is.
Yeah,
because it's not. Because it's such a big employer.
We've said a lot of negatives.
We have said a lot of negatives, but some of the best working years are there are times that I really, really enjoyed it. Yeah. Worked with great people, met great people. Like
the sense of family you have.
Absolutely, like the pride you do in like working like a Christmas shift on a Saturday night, and it's just, it can be really, really great. But it is sad that the negatives outweigh the positives in it as it currently is.
Yeah, so I completely agree. Is there any advice that you could give actually to people who have friends and family who still work in hospitality? There was something you kind of touched upon of, I think as part of that project you were doing of actually how we can actually outreach. Like, is there a way that we can, if we know people and friends and family, like how we can actually give support to them?
I think the big thing is to try and get them to look at the balance, look at what's worth it and what isn't. And if you feel that you've got a good balance and it's there, then absolutely fine. But not be afraid to accept that it may not be right. Try to look at the trends and what's the norms, like we said, like the going out every night, what works, and also try and have a look and see if the environment, if you're in, if that's what you're meant to be. I think it's very easy to fall into that, and I just think it's about trying to do that outside perspective into what's right and what isn't. And for some people, it is absolutely fine and they thrive off it. And I don't think there's anything wrong in saying that. And I don't want every single chef to decide to leave the industry or every single bar staff to leave, because that's not the case. But I just think it shouldn't be acceptable for the level of toxicity that there is in the industry. So, and I think the stats that they show, and I know those numbers, they were 2023, so that's not, we're talking most recent data, and that isn't acceptable.
No, not at all. So kind of to wrap up that little piece there, it's actually reach out to those people and give them support, make sure they're happy, and if they're not happy, find out if there's things that we can support them in to make little changes. And if there is an underlying issue of they really hate this job or whatever, it's giving them then support to get out of that. And that should be kind of the...
And unionise.
And that's the dream.
That's the dream, yeah.
So Mike, to wrap up, I always ask the same two final questions. My first one is, I think you've kind of touched on this a little bit actually, but what is your personal dream? I think it's really important that every single person has a dream.
It's so funny what we've just spoke about, because I have two, and one of them's a food truck, which is ironic given the industry going through, but this would be mine, and this would be on well-being, and it would be ours and done in the right way. And my dream, I want an antique shop.
An antique
I
shop.
want an antique shop, but I want like modern antiques.
Okay.
I want to bring in like the 80s and the 90s nostalgia.
Cool.
And I want those. I don't want rusty old clocks. And
so you want like a grade
vases.
1 Charizard?
I want grade 1 Pokemon cards. I want 90s wrestling figures. Yeah, I just want Dreamcast, and I just want old school secondhand. Like, that is the dream.
Dude, that sounds sick. Like at first I was like, oh, Mike wants like teacups.
Absolutely
and
not.
No,
Absolutely
dude, that is a sick idea.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's such a market. Like at the moment when like that nostalgia is booming, I would be if you want to start this up.
That's the dream. Yeah.
And then my final question, Mike, to wrap up. It's so important that we talk.
Yes.
And the whole reason why I started this is to have conversations. So on the back of today's conversation, who are you going to go away and talk about mental health with?
I think it is going to re-spark the conversations I have with my friends who are in hospitality again. Right. I think it's very easy to forget. And I just think by saying, oh, I've had this conversation with someone who previously worked in the industry, and this is how we felt, and just how are you feeling, and what do you want to look at? And I just think it's going to restart those conversations again.
That's amazing.
And also, I think it's going to spark conversations about reminding people not to be an ass when you go to a pub.
Yeah, I do think that Rishi tried to roll out national service.
This is what I was saying. Right. I said 3 months in retail, 3 months in a pub, please.
It would change. Everyone.
Yeah, I had the exact same conversation.
Because I do think if you experience what working in hospitality is actually like, you would treat people so differently. So differently.
Yeah.
Mike, thank you.
You're so welcome.
Much for your time and your opinions, thoughts, and just everything you shared, because you've shared just so incredibly, and has been an honour.
You're so welcome, and just thank you for starting these conversations and doing it, because it's just so important. It's why I was so keen to be a part of this.
Thank you, my friend.
You're welcome.
To wrap up, thank you for sticking with us for basically an hour. Please make sure you do like, comment, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Tell Mike how awesome he is. And make sure you reach out to a friend who works in hospitality and just check in that they're okay, because that is the most important thing. Until next time, goodbye.